Today, we are looking at the Subminimal Nanofoamer Gen 2, and I know exactly what you were thinking. Holy smokes, Matt, you just released your review on the Gen 1. And I completely agree, the timing of this release could not have been worse. It literally came out a couple weeks after I released my review. However, the good news is that this is really an iterative update to the product. It's not a completely new version. If you can tell on the box, it doesn't even say version 2 or Gen 2. It's just some minor updates on the same Nanofoamer Pro platform. So that's what we're gonna be looking at today. This is not gonna be a full review. If you want to see a full review, I will leave that linked up here. All of those opinions still hold. What this product is doing is really just addressing a few of the negatives that myself and customers have noticed of having the product in the field for about a year or so. So as a refresher, in that review, a few of the things I was complaining about. Stuck on milk. The heating plate got really hot, and especially around those fin guides, it really had a tendency to stick on milk, and you had to scrub it off or soak it to get it clean. Next, the lid. The lid had a tendency to not sit perfectly parallel, which shouldn't be an issue, but because the propeller is mounted to it, if you had it not seated perfect, your results, your milk texture was going to be all over the map. It could be extremely frustrating until you figure that out. Another thing, I wasn't personally complaining about this, but lots of customers were. They thought the temperature on this didn't go quite high enough, even if you let it run until it completely shut off. Next, and this is something in my personal opinion, there was just a lot of things to play with. There were 3 different waveguides for different type of milk. There are a bunch of different settings on the front for how much milk texture you want. The temperature, it had an okay setting, and then it kept going until it just shut off. There's a lot going on. It was a bit difficult to handle. And lastly, something that, again, I didn't notice, my Gen 1 still works. I use it to do some head-to-heads between them, but some people, if they washed it too aggressively on these contact points for the base, they actually managed to break it because it wasn't fully water sealed on those connections. So those were kind of the main complaints. Now let's go through the changes that have been seen on the Gen 2, see which one of those are addressed, see which one of those still exist. I have my notes here, so I don't forget anything because there is quite a lot of changes, even though it looks practically identical. Number 1 is the issue with stuck on milk. They have addressed this largely. The Gen 2 is much better for stuck on milk. The way they have done this is they have made a far thicker and more dispersive heating element. So because they made that thicker, the heat distributes more evenly on the base of the jug, and you're not going to get hot points that really lead to that stuck on milk. The downside of this is that heating on the Gen 2 is actually significantly slower than the Gen 1. In my tests, I noticed it takes around 40% longer to get up to the same temperature. Is that a worthwhile trade-off? I think so. I think most people would rather wait an extra 30 seconds rather than have to scrub this for a couple minutes to get milk off after every drink. So that is a big change. It is more in line with other milk frothers that we see, where it takes around kind of the 2 and a bit minute, depending on what temperature you want to get up to. So that's change number 1. The next big change, and something I was really happy to see, is with the lid. I don't exactly know how to describe how they have changed the seal around the lid, but it is just far more consistent in the way that it kind of snaps into place. The old Gen 1 had kind of this mushy feeling. It wasn't very reassuring when you had it on correctly, and that really contributed to the issue of consistency. On the Gen 2, it has a very defined ridge, and it really clunks into place so that you know, okay, I've got it in position, I'm going to get those consistent results. So that is a very positive change on the Gen 2. For those people who didn't think that this got high enough in temperature, they have raised the thresholds of the point where it says okay and the point where it shuts off completely. I'm going to put a chart of how they differ between Gen 1 and Gen 2 up here so you guys can see, but that's just a minor change in terms of when the machine indicates which temperature. So you have a higher max temperature, it goes all the way up to 70 degrees now. Okay, let's talk about small milk volume performance. In terms of that, they have made 2 adjustments. Settings 1 and settings 2 on the Gen 2 offer far shorter periods of air integration. The shortest setting on the Gen 2 is now half a second of aeration. So that, in combination with a new propeller adjustment system, allows for more effective steaming of much smaller milk volumes. Speaking of which, the propeller adjustment. The one thing that will kind of differentiate the Gen 2 from the Gen 1 visually is this little knob on the top of the lid. And what that is doing is allowing you to raise and lower where the propeller sits in the jug. If you have a really low milk volume, you can lower it down right close to the base so you don't get extra air integration that the programming isn't intending. So I have mixed feelings about this because, as you guys heard, one of my biggest complaints about the Nanofoamer Pro overall is that there's just a lot of things to kind of play around with to get your ideal settings. You have to pick the right waveguide. You have to pick the right foam setting. You have to let it go to a defined temperature. And now they've actually added another variable, which is you have to kind of find which propeller height is going to work best for you. There is a 0 point, so if you don't want to fiddle around with that, you can just leave it there. However, in my opinion, this just adds another variable to a kind of already complicated system in terms of how to get your perfect froth level. If you are somebody who wants to do smaller drink volumes, this will be useful, but overall, kind of a mixed opinion about this change. It is effective. I did play around with it. If you set it really close to the bottom, it allows it to sit below the surface better and make smaller drinks. So that's probably the best way to discover whether you're buying a Gen 1 or a Gen 2 is just to look for this knob on the top. Finally, the last big change has to do with this point on the bottom that we were talking about. The whole Nanofoamer Pro is now IPX5 rated. So IPX5 is a certification for water resistance. It is not waterproof. However, the idea behind that is it should help with the issue of people damaging the system itself during washing. The base is still the base. You're not going to want to put that anywhere near water, but the actual jug itself is now IPX5, which should help with those people who are damaging it. So overall, I completely agree with the idea to not really re-release this as a new version or a new product. It is really just iterative changes on the Gen 1, those tiny little nitpicks. If you are an existing owner of the Gen 1, should you be considering an upgrade? I'm gonna say probably not, unless you are really somebody who wants to make smaller volumes of milk, or you are really, really bothered by the stuck-on milk of the Gen 1. Anybody else who is happily using their first version, I don't see a reason to go and try to sell that to the used market and buy a new version. It works pretty much the same. You're still getting really good milk quality, but just with those small little tweaks. If you are a new buyer, again, I highly encourage you to watch the full review. Most of those opinions still stand, but obviously with the improvements that we now saw here. So the other big thing to note is behind me on the shelf here, this. In a future video, in the coming month or so, we're going to compare these two. This is the Drio Barista Maker. It is a foamer, it is a whisk, it does similar things, and it's got some pretty big chops. So be sure you subscribe so you don't miss this head-to-head. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope you did, I hope you found it useful, but please leave us a like, and we will see you in the next one.